for tuning in to this Hillside Talk. These talks are recorded live at our Hillside gatherings here in Las Vegas. We hope you enjoy this month's talk.
Hey, if you're watching by live stream, we all want to say hello. Let's all say hello to those joining. And we wish you were here because I think we're going to have a really good time. I'm so thankful for Matt and his vision for this. And I'm thankful for you guys because a vision is worthless unless people buy into it. And so thank you for coming. And I know it's kind of like a weird time because it's a couple days before the 4th of July and Independence. And so people are going to pool parties and doing other things. My Uber driver's like, yeah, I got invited to a pool party tonight. And so that's what everyone else is doing, is getting wasted at pool parties. You are so much better than them. You should give yourself extra Jesus points. You do realize I'm joking. Some of you are looking at me like, that's a joke. But I'm really glad you came. And I don't really know what everyone's background is. I don't know what you believe about this position. Now, just so you know me, I run an organization called the Center for Truth in Love. It's a Christian organization. It's faith-based. And it's also Bible-based. And so I'm not one of those Christians that just goes, hey, I'm a Christian. I'm one of those Christians that says, I am a Christian because I've followed Jesus and the teachings of Jesus, and I believe the Bible is authoritative to my life. And so when you say, Ben, do you think that this is true or this is true? Ultimately, my opinion doesn't matter. It needs to be grounded in the pages of Scripture. And so the discussion that I have inside of the church, what I call an internal conversation, is always guided by the truth of Scripture. But I don't know where you're at tonight, and you may say, well, I'm not a believer, or just kind of a casual Christian, or I'm someone that thinks the teachings of Jesus have merit, but they're not authoritative. And if that's you, understand that I have two conversations. So I'm happy to discuss with you, but that's a different conversation. I kind of come from a more rational perspective. But what I'd like to also show you is how these things are true within inside the universe. And there can only be one truth. There can't be competing truths. So there is truth and there is error. And then now there can be nuanced situations, but there's only one truth. And so two competing ideas can't work. And so we can approach issues from a rational standpoint, or we can approach them from a Bible-based standpoint, and ultimately, I think they're both valid. And so that's what we're going to do tonight, is tackle an incredibly challenging issue. Now, some people will say, "Well, we're at a church. Why would you talk about the issue of abortion? Isn't that a political issue?" And that's certainly a cultural position. And there is the term secularism, which typically tends to be not God. So you're secularist, you're not God. But if you actually look at the dictionary definition, it's very interesting. Secularism is get to sit down. This is only the 5th time I've given a message today. So number 5 is when I get to sit down because I'm old. What was I talking about? Oh, if you look at the dictionary definition of secularism, it's interesting. Secularism is the idea that faith should not affect public policy. Well, that is very interesting because in 1 Corinthians 10:31, the Bible says this. If you're a Christian, it says, whether therefore you eat or drink or whatsoever you do all to the glory of God. And in fact, the world that God created, sometimes we get this idea, well, if I'm at church and if I'm praying or if I'm reading my Bible, I'm doing something spiritual and everything else is neutral. And yet God says everything that we're doing should be done bringing glory to Him. Policy or public policy, and I've worked in politics, public policy is just an explanation with laws of your worldview. And all of us have a worldview. So I would ask the person that say, well, why would Christians talk about abortion? That's a political issue. I would ask, should we talk about murder? Because that's a political issue. We have a policy in our nation, you're not allowed to kill people. You notice that? We have a policy against it. If you didn't know, just putting you on notice, you're not allowed to kill people. Well, we preach that in the church too. You shouldn't kill someone. You say, well, why are you preaching politics? Well, just because our nation has a policy about it doesn't mean that it doesn't affect the Bible. These aren't separate things. And unfortunately, culture has really placed a lot of separatism in our thinking. That's essentially secularism by the dictionary definition. It's not just an anti-God. So we've got to be reminded that these things affect all of life. We're also dealing with a life. Or at least from my perspective, the way I look at it, that an unborn child is still a human being. and they're a piece of it. So we're dealing with life here, and we're dealing with very important issues. Now, do those have political consequences? Certainly they do. But we could go even a step further and say there's loving your neighbor, but there's also you and God. And there's a lot of young people in here, and if I could speak from the heart for a moment. As I was preparing for this, I watched a video of a woman who was Australian and came to the United States, and she said she grew up in an evangelical church. I don't know if she did or not, but she said she did. And she said her church never discussed this issue. When she got to the United States, she realized that it was a little more heated of a topic, and she only got her perspective from people outside of the church or people inside of the church that had had an abortion, had never really discussed this in truth. And so today this is important to me because you may wind up in a situation where that's an option. Where you'd say, it's a little embarrassing, I made a mistake. The Bible teaches that a physical relationship, a sexual relationship is limited to a married man and woman, and here I am pregnant. Or here I got this girl pregnant. It's kind of embarrassing. So, it'd be easier for my reputation is just to dispose of this pregnancy. And so what I'd like to do is walk through that question, and then I would say this: if not, there's a girl or a woman in my small group who had that option, and she grew up in the church, and she said, you know what? Nobody ever told me what to do. They just said, do whatever you feel is right. And so I want to let's talk about what is right, because you may be that person that can be a voice of truth in this woman's life. And so those are the two reasons why I think this is a very important topic. So what is true here? And so we're going to dig into that. So I have several things, but I want to start with a illustration that I give that, and I got to keep an eye on the time. How long have I been going? 5-6 minutes. Okay, so I've got about 25 minutes. So I want to start with an illustration that I give oftentimes when I discuss difficult topics. And so I want to begin with this question: is it possible that you're wrong? Or I ask it, is it possible that I'm wrong? And so as I present a logical explanation of it, I want to ask this question. So I've got a friend, and I probably shouldn't mention his name, but I'm going to. I wouldn't be surprised if he's even watching. His name is Aaron. And he just hit the like button there, or he just left the live stream. But Aaron and his wife and my wife and myself were in San Francisco. And this was, and sometimes this is true in cities, but this was years ago. GPS was better now than it is then. But sometimes even if you're in big cities or tall buildings, it's hard to map like walking with GPS because the GPS like bounces around. Well, this was happening. We're headed to Ghirardelli Square. Anybody here ever been to Ghirardelli Square? I'm just kind of curious. Okay. So Ghirardelli Square, it's from the chocolates. It's where they used to make the chocolates. They don't make it there anymore. But now it's like this big tourist spot in San Francisco, and it has the letters Ghirardelli spelled out over the square, and you can see these letters from like miles and miles away. They're probably about a story to 2 stories high, each individual letter. So we're headed to Ghirardelli Square, and I keep going, man, I think so. I think we're right. I'm not sure. Now, Aaron is one of those friends, maybe you have one of these, that's always right about everything. Do you have a friend like that? Okay. Now I actually mean he's always right about everything. Like, he's the guy I call, like, I got a question about this. He just knows everything about everything. Now, people like that tend to not know what to do when they're wrong, because they rarely are. I mean, usually these people, they know. Now, there's also the person that thinks they're right about everything. I'm not talking about that. There's actually some of your friends you probably know. It's like, that guy just kind of knows everything, you know? And so he's one of those people, and it's like stop in his tracks when he's like, oh, I'm wrong. Like, I'm never wrong. And so we're walking to Ghirardelli Square, and he's getting frustrated because I'm not giving definitive. I'm like, I think we're going the right way. I think we're going the right. And finally, he's just frustrated. So he stands on the street corner. He stops, and he turns around, and he looks at his wife, Julie, and my wife, Mackenzie, and me. And he goes, we are going the wrong way. Ghirardelli Square is that way. You know, this big gesture. The problem was, as a street corner, he chose to do this, and he's kind of like halfway in the street. you could see the sign from Ghirardelli Square there, and it was one of the most amusing things. And when you're with someone that's always right, you've got to like milk this for all it's worth. Like, this is the one moment you're wrong. So he's standing there and lecturing us. He's like, it's the other way. And I'm just kind of smiling. I'm just letting it go. And then finally, I thought this would solve it. I said, Aaron, turn around. I don't have to turn around. I know it's that way. I said, just humor me. Turn around. So he turns around. Massive sign. Ghirardelli Square. And I said, see? And he looks back at us, and I'll never forget it. He goes, that's not it. He's like, that's the sign. That's not actually where the square is at. It's back that way. Well, at that point, we just had to proceed on, and we went to Ghirardelli Square, and he followed us and found that he was wrong. When I look at the issue of abortion, what I find is people that get a confusing perspective of an unborn life. And if I pull the curtain back, I would ask you to divorce some of these ideas that are wrong and really look at the truth. Because I've seen it over and over again where the curtain is pulled back and a pro-choice advocate would say, I may be wrong, but I don't care. You know, I would say the same if we look at it logically with a pro-life advocate. The point is that we're here attempting to find truth. And so let's look at what's true here. So I've got this. If you want to turn around, I'm sorry. Oh, you can see it here or there. We've got screens everywhere. It's the 21st century. You try to find a place where you can't see a screen. That's the challenge here. So logical rationale for the preservation of preborn human life, okay? Now, none of these, this may sound like accusatory already, but you have to say that this is a life because it has to be, and it's preborn, it's not born, and so we're going to give a rationale for this. So let's look into this. So number one, we've got to establish common ground. Now, as I teach you this, I also want to teach you how to engage skeptics. So if you have a Christian moral worldview, you also need to be thinking, how can I give the truth in love? And that's why our organization exists, and it's funny that Matt says, Ben fits Hillside, because I feel like Hillside fits the Center for Truth and Love, and we very much agree on that. The point is philosophically we're very much aligned because we want to speak the truth in a loving way, and this is not an either or. And so that's what our organization does. That's what this does. And so it's a very great partnership, and I think we're going to need more of that. And I love looking at a group of young professionals here that really are going to be the future of our nation, and we need you speaking truth because people aren't speaking truth. And so I hope that these can be some ideas. So when you have a conversation, a difficult one, it's very important to establish common ground. So what would that look like? Number one, do we care for and empathize with the problems that arise from a crisis pregnancy? I don't think we do this often. And so when a woman has a baby and has 6 other kids that she can't even afford to feed, and now there's another kid on the way, what's she going to do? When a young woman who's in a professional world or whatever the crisis is, have we even stopped to think about what is her life like? So I think that's important, that empathy is there. Number 2, are we aware of the medical factors that may be significant in danger for a mother's health or her future quality of life? So are we aware of that? So now once again, I'm establishing common ground. I'm not giving evidence here. So we haven't got to that. I'm just going, well, what are some common ground? And so I think oftentimes pro-choice advocates will say, well, have you even considered? Well, the answer should be yes. And so that's some common ground. Next, are we aware of the medical factors that may significantly affect the child once it is born? So the quality of life for the mother or for the child. Some of these may be wrong, and I'm sorry, I've got to fix this. This is the first time I've used this slideshow, so just deal with me. It seemed right. Yeah, it's intimate gathering. We're just... Yeah. There's probably like 10,000 people watching this on the live stream. They all just clicked off. They don't even know what the. So number next, are we aware of the social conditions and challenges that the child may face? And let me go on two. One is the medical challenges. This one thing that's very popular to do is to abort children that have Down syndrome. We can determine whether that's the case, and so let's abort them. Are we aware of these the challenge? Or this kid is a result of rape. Like, what's his life or her life going to be? And so, are we aware of those challenges? And I think sometimes we'll rush into it. Now, once again, I'm going to get here. Don't dismiss me, but I'm like, I think you should. If we're going to have common ground, we need to be aware of these challenges. Let's go on. Number 5, scientifically, are we aware of the biological status of the fetus? But are we aware of what's happening on a scientific level? Is this a life? Is it not a life? Are we aware of what's happening? And then lastly, I would say, are we working from a framework of absolute ethical morality or situational anecdotes? Now, this is very important because our culture has adopted a concept called moral relativism, which means we believe in right and wrong. We also believe that we get to dictate right and wrong for ourselves whenever we want to. Well, if we're working from that standpoint, then I can't give you a logical rationale. So I'm giving a logical rationale. But if we're working from a standpoint of, this is morality and situational anecdotes, morality changes from person to person and situation to situation, well, then I can't even give something that's logical, because the statement, morality changes all the time, is an absolute statement about morality. So it's a self-contradictory statement. That position is illogical. And I just want to point that out to say, morality always changes. Is that statement always true? Because it's a statement about morality. So understand, we have to work from a situation where we say there is an absolute ethic. Now, in absolute ethics, things change from time to time. Is it wrong to take a life? Well, we can have that discussion because it's wrong to end human life, but what if someone is attempting to end another human's life? Well, we have an absolute ethic that we're working from, but there's a situation that has changed. And so you see the difference between a situation and an ethic. So is it right to kill the guy in Las Vegas that's murdering all these people? Yes. Why? Because he's taking human life, and we are working from an ethic that human life has value. The ethic is absolute. Situations change. So what I'm saying is, what we can't do is just change the ethic. Do you see the difference? Okay, so we go on, and this may make sense here. So we have consistent, so here's number next, is we need to look at consistent argumentation. So the first 4 arguments, empathy, life of the mother, quality of life for the mother, or quality of life for the child. If this child is a life, they're irrelevant. Now I'm giving a logical rationale. If this child is a life, those are totally irrelevant. Now, I'm fine to find common ground to be aware of them, but they're irrelevant. You say, why? Because if the child is a life, would we use any of those arguments for 8-year-olds? Well, here's an 8-year-old with Down syndrome. Let's just exterminate him. Wouldn't we all agree that that's morally irreprehensible? Here's an 8-year-old child who is the result of an incestuous rape. Well, we should murder that 8-year-old child. See, we'd never use that for an 8-year-old child. Therefore, we can't use that argument if the child is a life. That argument is irrelevant. What about the status of the mother? That argument is also irrelevant when it comes to a 4-year-old. We're going to go, well, this mother's really stressed and she can't pay her bills, and this 4-year-old has a terrible life, so let's kill the 4-year-old. We wouldn't do that. So you can't apply this argument rationally. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't empathize, understand. But I'm saying is you can't apply the argument rationally because it doesn't work if the child is alive. Now, next is the life of the mother. Now, notice if you see that on the slide, I highlighted that. Because what we have is a situational ethic. Now, the ethic isn't situational, but we have a situation. Because now, if the child is alive, now I haven't got to whether it is or not, but if the child is alive, then we have 2 lives we're deciding here. Now, to me, health of the mother is irrelevant. But the life, if I believe this mother is going to die if the baby goes to term or if she has the baby, then now we're making a decision between two lives. That's a tough decision to make. And I would say, and I'm willing to even go on record, I would like the chance that if people bring me argumentation to revoke this, but I would be willing to go on record to say that I do not find abortion to be morally wrong if you're choosing between two lives. And I mean, this mother is going to die or this baby is going to die. Both cannot live. We know that with a scientific certainty. Well, then I would say, well, you're making a choice. Either the mother's going to die or the baby's going to die, but two lives will not continue to live after that. So now I'm happy if someone's watching the live stream, if you'll send me a message, don't light me up. I'm happy to change that position if you bring me evidence for it, but I feel comfortable enough that now here's two things that are relevant: the biological status. Is this child a life or is it not? If it's not a life, then all of my arguments will fall through. And so if you can prove to me scientifically that this isn't a life, well, then it's just a potential life. And where do you draw the line with potential life? Because it's like, well, men and women can't be in the same room because they could potentially, do something that would fertilize a child. But, where do you draw the line? And we say contraceptive, and you go on down the line. The point is it a life or is it not? And I think that's the question, the biological. And then secondly, absolute ethical morality. That we have to have an absolute. Those are the two of the six that I just gave for common ground for me to proceed, really. And I would say number two, the reason why I highlighted it is let's take that off the table. The reason why I want to take that off the table is because those situations need to be decided individually. So let's just take that off the table right now. And once again, I'm willing to concede that it's possible that an abortion could be ripped. So let's take that off the table. And then we leave the two. So biological status and absolute ethical morality. Let's see what notice next. 5 mistakes we make when we discuss the issue of abortion. Number 1, silencing ideas based on the person who is giving the idea. So I want to give you my perspective, but before I ever get there, let me do this. It's called an ad hominem attack. In other words, that guy is white, so he can't discuss this issue. It's very popular. Let me give you an example of this on the street. So I'm discussing very kindly. I'm not angry, super chill. I'm discussing the issue of abortion with this woman. Here's what she says.
So it's a necessary evil, is what I'm saying.
Abortion is a necessary evil.
Personally, agree with it or not, is I think neither here nor there because it's necessary.
So my opinion doesn't matter?
It's not that your opinion doesn't matter, but I think that most pro-life defenders are entitled white men. So a man cannot become pregnant. So how can a man define what a woman can and cannot do?
Do you think I'm an entitled white man?
I would assume so.
Woman talked to me for 5 minutes and she assumes I'm an entitled white man just because I am a white man that owns an iPhone. So that's an ad hominem attack. Now, here's the thing. You say, are you deeply bothered by that? No. Because white men in this country enslaved other people. Okay, so I can deal with that. Just so you know my perspective, one really ticks me off, but I will say, if we're going to have a logical conversation, you can't just neglect my opinion. Yes, that's racist, but you can't neglect my opinion because I'm white, if that makes sense. I'm just having a logical conversation here. Does that make sense? So it's fair. So it's an ad hominem attack. So once again, here's the slide. We'll go back. Silencing ideas based on the person who's given the idea. Ad hominem, that's not irrational. So number 2, and it's very popular in the pro-life. Well, you're white, or you're this, or you're a man, so you can't talk about that. Well, you can't make a baby without a man and a woman. And I think men should be allowed to have a conversation about what happened to the child that they've created or they've been a part of creating. Number 2, creating straw man arguments. This happens all the time. Stuff that pro-lifers don't even believe. We're saying that, well, you believe this, and then I tear it down. It's like, well, I don't even believe that. So I actually agree with your disagreement on it. We don't have time to get into the Bill Nye thing, but Bill Nye has a video in which he just creates a bunch of straw man arguments and then tears them down. And I'm like, I actually agree with you that, yeah. Anyways, I've got like this massive notes. We just don't have time to get into the video. Number 3, basing the choice on the circumstance of the conception. that's irrelevant if the child's alive, once again. So the circumstances. Now, here's the thing. Politically, when it comes to policy, I'm happy to concede rape and incest if we're willing to outlaw all abortions for now. Now, hopefully, we'll get that law changed too. But at this point, but basing it, so politically, I think we need to work differently politically than we do from a framework. However, basing the choice on the circumstance of conception, that's not relevant to the life of the child. Number next, basing the choice on the circumstance following birth. I kind of mentioned this already. So the child's going to have a terrible life or whatever. Who are you to decide what is good and evil? Because what if, I have a brain injury and I can't go to the movies. My wife loves going to the movies. I can't go to the movies. Well, your life's miserable. Let's kill you. Well, we go a step further. Like, who's to say that, have you ever been around a child with Down syndrome? Now, I can tell you, I've been around many. Never one time have I ever been around a child with Down syndrome and go, that kid's just having a terrible time. Someone should just shoot him in the face. No. Who are we to decide quality of life? Who made us God? Anyways, I'm sorry, I digress. Basing a choice on the quality of the life of the mother. Now, here's the thing. I do want to be compassionate. And it's not compassionate. However, we wouldn't kill a child. We've already discussed this. All right. That's the Bill Nye video. We just don't have time for it. I'd love to, though, but it'd take 20 minutes for me to. He gives so many logical fallacies. I don't mean to be unkind to Bill Nye. They're just logical fallacies. And it's like, well, he's Bill Nye the Science Guy. Whatever he says must be true. And it's just not, and I don't mean to be unkind to that. I'm saying factually, it's just not. Arguments from a pro-life position. So here's the argument. And once again, I'm giving a rational argument. So I'm not working from points of anecdote. And so arguments are based in logical flows. So premise, conclusion. All right, so that's what we're going to get. Here's an argument. Okay, number one, morality is absolute. So that's an argument that I'm making that I'm saying it's absolute. Therefore, we have the right to prohibit some behaviors because they are objectively wrong. Would everyone agree with that? Without premise, I'm just curious. Would anyone disagree with that? So what I'm saying is, if morality is objective, I'm allowed to say you can't murder that person. I'm allowed to say you can't rape that man or that woman. And even if your culture says it's okay to rape them, I can come in and say there's an objective moral principle, therefore it's okay for me to tell you what to do. That's what I'm saying. All right, number two, human life has transcendent value. Now, I believe that. I believe all humanity should believe that. I think some people don't, but it does. Even people that don't kind of do in their worldview. Like, it has transcendent value. In other words, if I have to choose between a horse and a person, I kill the horse if I have to. If I have to choose between a person and a dog, that life, human life, is more valuable than all life on the planet. I'm not saying I'm killing a dog or a horse, don't get me wrong, but I'm saying life has transcendent value. Number next, men or women should be prohibited from ending human life. Could we all agree with that? Number next, a preborn baby is a human life. Therefore, it is morally wrong to abort that's supposed to say preborn, not preterm, a preborn baby. So that is the argument. And so to me, that's where it lies. Is a baby alive? And I'm happy to send you these slides. And I would say absolutely. So I listened to a video today with Ben Carson. I couldn't get it downloaded in time. Dr. Ben Carson has 75 honorary doctorates and has done 12,000 brain surgeries. He's the only person in the world to separate conjoined twins that were conjoined at the brain. It's a beautiful story. In South Africa, he went there. They did not have the medical equipment to do the surgery as needed. 30 plus hours into the surgery, he walked out. They had a conversation. I worked for Dr. Carson. I remember him multiple times telling this story. I heard him tell it in person. And they walked out and he said, we have to stop the surgery, because back then they had the technology where you could sedate the children for 20, 30 days, let them get their blood back up and go back to the surgery. They did not have the technology there in South Africa. They said if we do that, the children will die. He's been in surgery 30 plus hours. They did not have the technology at the time to just the digital things you do now. So the man took a scalpel, and with his hands, he's had very steady hands, and separated those two girls. In 2015, they graduated high school, both of them. It was a beautiful thing. He's done some incredible things. One of the things that he's done is operate on preborn children. Several things as I was listening to that video today. Number one, he said, clearly they can feel pain. We sedate preborn children so they can feel pain. Next, we know they have a heartbeat. 22 days, a baby has a heartbeat. Undeniable. They have a heartbeat. They can feel pain. They have a heartbeat. They can move. They look like humans. They have fingers and toes and things. What is an abortion? An abortion's goal is to terminate the life of the cells inside a mother. If that's not a life, what are we killing? And I don't care where you're at on this issue, after 22 days, you're stopping a heartbeat. And so here's what I would say. If a preborn baby is a human life, and if humankind is allowed to stop other people from committing murder, then conclusion number 5 flows out logically. It is morally wrong to abort a preborn baby. So that's the argument there. It's a logical rationale. Is there anything else in here? Oh, 3 things. A preborn baby is a human life. 3 things to consider. It's not supposed to say formation. It's formation, its identity, and its viability. And I just kind of went through those there. So, any questions? Yes, sir.
So, what about
before the 22 days? That's a tough one. So the traditional pro-life position is typically that life begins at conception. I would like to see more technology to verify this. So once again, I'm good. I would like to see more technology. But here's the problem: is when Roe v. Wade came out, we didn't have the technology we now have. We didn't have ultrasounds. We didn't have that. We didn't know everything that was happening. And so back then, if someone made the argument, well, we don't have the technology necessarily to absolutely identify the time, which this is a great question, by the way. Wouldn't you have liked to back then just go, well, let's wait and see, let's err on the side of safety? So to me, what I would say is, even without the technology, let's just err on the side of conception, and then we'll deal with things after that. So that would be my position, because I just believe in life so much. So I would like to lean there. Now, just so you know, scientifically, and this is where it does get sketchy. I just want to be honest with everybody. I don't want to hide anything, because you can do the research. It's there. Most sperm, when they're attached to the egg, do not produce a baby. The percentage is high that don't. And so sometimes a woman, a lady, will just discharge that. Even an attached fertilized egg will discharge that in her monthly cycle. And so oftentimes we don't even know that they're attached. And so that's what I'm saying. This is a challenging issue. Is that a child? And what I would say is, I'd just like to err on the side of safety. And often we're not even concerned with the issue until 22 days after anyways. Now, where we do get into is what types of pills are we taking, because the morning after and some of those, and that is not a discussion I've done enough research on, I'm prepared to answer. So my simple answer is, I'd like to err on the side of going moment of conception right now. So that's my answer, but definitely. But the thing is I'd love legislation that would say heartbeat. I'm just happy with that. And let's start there when it comes to living it out practically. Other questions? I'm sorry when you give a slam dunk thing like that, and there's no, it's kind of What else do I? And I'm not like patting myself on the back. I was just like very authoritative. And I just want you to know what I'm saying. Slam dunk is not what I mean. I was just very direct in the way I presented it. I'm happy for you to challenge me, and I'd love to talk about it. I present it very direct, but look, we're up for discussion. That's what this is about, is a conversation. And if someone's watching the live stream, if there's a question on live stream, I'd be happy to entertain that as well. Yes, ma'am. And it doesn't have to be abortion either. We can discuss other topics too.
So if, say, you're talking to a person that believes that abortion is okay, and they say, I have every right to have this abortion because it is my body, how do you talk to them?
Yeah, I didn't really address that. So I should have. If you go to my Facebook page, about 3 videos down, the third video down, that video addresses it really well. But did anybody know who Benjamin Watson is? He plays for the New Orleans Saints. Really cool guy. He's a strong Christian. His wife just recently was pregnant with twins. They just had twins. And she does a video. I think she's still pregnant when she does the video. It's phenomenal. She had 2 twin boys. And so she said, if those boys are my body, does my gender change? Because I know the gender. Does her gender change? So we clearly have a separate body. And she goes, do I become 3 persons? She's basically the Trinity. She's like 3 in 1, right? And I don't mean to trivialize it, but it's just like, yeah. So, and that's a great question. Well, this is my body. And I'm like, I'm fine. I want you to make choices for your body. However, the baby is not your body. That's a separate body, number 1. Then number 2, can you do anything with your body that you want? Do you know what the Baker Act is? The Baker Act limits people who say they're going to commit suicide. If you say, I'm going to commit suicide, and it sounds credible, we will take you and put you in a clinic until we know you won't harm yourself anymore. So you can't, in our nation, you can't do what you want with your body. You can't kill yourself. And so both arguments fall through. It is a forceful argument, but at the end of the day, I would just say, well, is that your body? Now, once again, I'm answering this directly. I'd want to talk with her. I'd want her to know that I care for her. I'd want her, before I get to that. And if I could add one more thing, I answer this very directly from a very logical, rational standpoint. I'm not going to have a conversation with somebody like that. I'm just laying the case out. Understand, if what I say is true, there's a lot of women that have killed their own children. Imagine that. To think about that. Why are there so many pro-choice people when the science is clear? Because there's a lot of people that have to admit they murdered their own child. And here's what I'd say to that person. And maybe that exists in here. Here's what I'd say. Is God's grace is bigger than that. That's how big it is. That God's grace, that's exactly why Jesus died. Is because he knew we would get things wrong. I also would say this, even in our own nation, there's a difference between murdering someone in cold blood and murdering someone in ignorance. So there's a difference. God even understands the difference in that. And so, once again, I'm not saying that it's not wrong. But that is probably one of the biggest challenges. And when you have to face the fact that, well, I've killed my own child. That's why there's so many pro-choice people. That's why people go, I want to shout about my abortion, because I don't want to deal with the shame of that. That's a hard thing to walk through, but I can tell you God's grace is greater than our shame. It really is. Other questions? Phenomenal question. I'm glad you raised that. Yes, ma'am. Pass the mic because people on the live stream are watching, all 2 of them.
So I was actually having a conversation with somebody a while back kind of on this subject, and they happened to be male. And so...
So they can't talk about it?
No. It just happened that it wasn't actually with, usually it's with females. Anyway, but they brought up a good point of like the pro-choice people say, well, it's the woman's body, it's their decision. And the standpoint that the guy had on it was, well, what about the guy? It's their baby too, right? So if the woman chooses to keep the baby and he wanted to have chosen the abortion, well then why does he still have to pay the child support? Stuff like that. So what would your standpoint on that be?
I think it goes back to bodies. So the pro-choice argument is going that this separate baby is part of the woman's body. That would be the argumentation for that. So I would just say it's not. So then that opens up that can of worms. But what they would say to that is, well, it's a woman's body. It is her choice. And she's going to have to deal with it, which is why we need, and I would agree, we need to hold men accountable. If we really believe if we're really pro-life, then we need to be pro-life after the life is born. And that life needs a dad. That life needs financial support. So if those things don't exist, pro-lifers can't just... Now, I did see this, and this was really good. Someone said, they're talking about the pro-life movement, and they said, well, why don't you care about the child after it's born? Well, we need to, but she made a really good argument. She goes, there's tons of organizations out there that deal with that. There are one-issue organizations in our country, and it's okay. No one is going to, the American Cancer Society and asking them to cure diabetes because they're there to cure cancer. And so it's okay for the pro-life movement to be pro-life. That's why they're there. But I also, as a Christian, I'm more than a single issue. I'm more than pro-life. So as a Christian, I want to care for that life before and after. So that was an interesting point. It was kind of connected to that, and I thought she made a strong one. I thought that was really good. Yes.
Hi. So,
Hannah, right?
Earlier, sorry?
Hannah, right?
Yes, sir. So earlier, you brought up, the circumstance of, how the child was, conceived, whether it was rape or whatever. Didn't really matter if life is life, but,
right.
Say it's a very, very, young girl, 13 to 14, and it is rape, and, it is threatening to her life because she is so young, and it wasn't her choice in the first place. What would your standpoint be on that?
Well, once again, when we go to life of the mother, and I limit that to life of the mother. So oftentimes it's life and health of the mother. And the reason why I have a problem with that argument is health can be mental health. And so it's this will make me unhappy to have this child. Okay, so I'm saying life of the mother. So if it is a contextualized situation where this young woman is going to die, then we got to make a decision there. We've got to do that, and that's why I'm saying I am for. If someone's going to die, someone's going to die. So we've got to make these hard decisions, and that's the challenge of the broken world. I don't know. I don't know the science behind that, so I'd need to dig in. I would think that if. And this is why I don't know. The pregnancy may be very, very hard, but very, very hard is not the same as she's going to die. And so if she's going to die, then let's address that issue individually, each one, and let's walk through that. That's what I would say to that. Great question, though. And these are hard. And this is why Adam and Eve should have never eaten the fruit in the garden. Really, because brokenness brings problems like this. And these are real things that we have to discuss. Why? Because sin's in the world. In a perfect world, we wouldn't have to have these questions, but we don't live in one. And so a great question, though. Very good. Good for us to think about.
I have heard the argument that if a woman has been raped and gets pregnant from it, that it is a punishment for her to have to carry this baby to term. There are a lot of things that you have to do to make sure that you have a healthy pregnancy, a lot of expense that is incurred with doctor bills and all that kind of thing. So even though people say adoption's always an option, that's great. There's 9 months of bills, and women who have been raped can have PTSD. They can, lots of different conditions from that. To constantly be reminded and then to have this financial and emotional and mental burden of carrying the child of someone that you know is not a good person because they've raped you. I've heard the argument that it is a moral obligation for you to terminate that child because it came from evil. So what would you say to that?
Yeah, that is a great articulation of that point. So one, I would say this is where the entire conversation is being had. And that's not fair. I love what some people say. It's like, well, in that conversation, the first thing I would say, are you willing to concede that all other abortions outside of that are wrong, are morally wrong? Because if you're not, then I'm not even going to have that conversation with you unless that's the person, because then we definitely want to have that. But if you're just making up a wild scenario, which does occur, but it's far more rare than these other ones, I want you to concede to all of these other things first. Otherwise, that's not your argument then. So that's not fair. But let's talk about that. And that's where, as a Christian, and this is where it gets difficult. As a Christian, there is a transcendent value to life. And so if that's a life, then we have a responsibility to that life. And it stinks that pain exists. But we have a responsibility to life. And I also would say those are moments where beauty can come from brokenness. And what could that child do? Who could that child be? What terrible circumstances. And even if that child's given up for adoption, how beautiful that is to those parents that adopt that child, and how wonderful that life will be for that child. And but I would say, I don't say that flippantly, but I would say we have a responsibility to life because life's transcendent is what I would say to that. And I know you're speaking devil's advocate. I think you would agree with that. But a phenomenal articulation of that position. And I think that's good for us to be able to do, is go, what would the other person say as I think through that? That's really good. Yes, ma'am?
My question is, you said that the baby has a heartbeat at 22 days.
Yes.
So then before...
Google said that. I assume that Google's was correct.
Okay. So before those 22
Everyone's
days...
going to Google and see if Google's correct.
Before those 22 days, there's still cells, but it doesn't have a heartbeat. So is it living then? Or is that a potential life?
Yeah, we already discussed that. You might have stepped out for a second. And let's talk about that afterwards. I'll answer that again for you afterwards, but we did already discuss that, and you're fine, because I know you've been in and out helping with our live stream. Anyone else? Yep.
Don't throw it.
So how would you answer the argument if someone said they don't believe life starts at a heartbeat, but they believe when life can sustain itself outside of the womb? So in other words, if it can't sustain itself, it's not really life because it's leaching off of the mother still.
Man, I felt like I was thorough, and yet there's so many things that we've skipped over. So the sustainability argument is a 1-month-old sustainable without any help? Is a 4-year-old? Can a 4-year-old sustain themselves? Certainly not a 2 or 3-year-old. So the sustainability argument is not really valid. It sounds logical for about 30 seconds. And I don't mean to be it's a great argument, the sustainability. Like it sounds logical shortly, but look, this child can't sustain itself even after it's born for quite some time. So we exterminate it then. No. It's just very close. Yes, ma'am.
I know a couple people who are pro-choice and then vegan because they believe killing animals is wrong. I feel like there's an argument there that I can't quite articulate, and I was hoping you could you could expand on that.
Let's see. I actually have this in the. So point number 2, human life has transcendent value.
So how do you explain that to someone who thinks animals and humans aren't the same?
Well, it depends. Once again, I remember at the beginning I talked about the 2 types of conversation. So there's an internal conversation and external. So if this is someone that holds the Bible in in high regard as a Christian does and should, then I want to have a conversation biblically and demonstrate that all of creation was created by God in a certain way through his voice, with one exception. Do you know what it was? Mankind. God actually reached into the ground and formed man. And he also said, let us make man in our image. So mankind is an image bearer of God. A cow is not an image bearer of God. And so human life has transcendent value. That's why I can eat a cow and not a person. Now, you're saying, well, you're talking with a vegan. I would say, this is what I believe. You're welcome to believe whatever you want. But this is my point as a Christian, is I believe that all life came from God. And then I might even have a discussion about some other apologetic things to bring them to the point that the Bible's then authoritative. And once the Bible's authoritative, then I can work from that point.
So my biggest problem with politics is that everyone stands on different ground, like you were saying. Some people believe the Bible, some people don't. So how do you bring people to the same ground if they don't stand on the same ground, I guess?
That is the $1 trillion question. How do you bring people? I mean, yeah, how do you do that exactly? And that's why, you know what, I will say this, because we're in political season, which pretty much is always now in America. But I will say this, as awful as some politicians are, they have a hard job, don't they? Because that's the question. How do I get my 100,000 constituents, or if you're President Trump, how do I get 300 million Americans to get behind an idea? That's tough. I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican, but I mean, that's a hard job. So that's the $1 million question, or the $1 trillion question. I mean, that's the question. How do we do that? And this is what's great. I can tell you this. One day there's going to be a king who's perfect, who never gets it wrong. And in his kingdom, we just do whatever he says. It's real simple, because whatever he says will be perfect. And that's why I love Christianity, is because every kingdom mankind comes up with will be broken. It doesn't work. Now, some are better than others. But, and honestly, I would say, 4th of July around the corner, the American system is a pretty good one. I mean, we have problems, but we're the least racist country in the world. We have problems at our border because people want to come in. I mean, people want to be here. You know, we got a long ways to go, but it's not so terrible. And sometimes we're like, well, let's go to, what is Michael Moore going to Cuba asking to get into the country because her health care is better? I mean, these things are silly. Anyway, I digress. How do we get there? I don't know. I think that's the job of the politician. And if that's your job, let's say it's your job, would you want people praying for you? Now, I'm not asking you, I'm just in general. Do you pray for your elected officials? I was in D.C. speaking at a conference at the Museum of the Bible, and so my wife and I went to the Supreme Court. And we went in, and the justices there, and I'm like, I don't know all their names. You know what's really scary? How can I pray for them if I don't know their names? They're making some of the most important decisions that are going to affect my life, if I have children, my children's life, and my grandchildren's life. Why am I not praying for them? Do you know the name of your congressman? If you don't, I know you're not praying for him or her. I know you're not, because you can't pray for someone you don't know their name. God be with all the congressmen. No. We need to be more active. Because if we really care about our community, we will care about the laws that shape our community, right? Now, I think some Christians take it to the extreme. Now, I'm sorry, that's a whole nother thing. All right. Any final questions? Because I know I've gone kind of long. Yeah, do you want to just close this out, Matt? Or?
Oh, I had a question.
Oh, go ahead.
One of the biggest arguments I've seen from pro-choicers is people are going to get abortions anyways. They're just going to, if it's banned, if it becomes illegal, which this is one of the biggest questions right now because a lot of states are closing up the clinics. So how do you address that argument from the other side? It's going to happen anyways, and it's safer is the argument. It's safer if we just allow it to be legal and don't close these clinics, because many women die if they go about it illegally.
Safer for who? It ain't safer for the kid that's dying. The idea that let's allow a woman to safely kill her child is almost absurd. Now it's a great argument that I didn't address. But, oh, well, we want women to be able to safely kill their child, because if we don't help them kill their, it is truly absurd. The idea that we wouldn't protect human life. I've got two closing things really quick. Do you want, and then I'll just turn it over to you however you want it. So, sorry, and if you want to ask more questions, I'll stick around afterwards. I'd love to discuss anything you want with you. I will say this for people watching on the live stream. If you'd like a free resource, if you text the number 345-345, text the word prepared with a D on the end of it to 345-345. Our organization, the Center for Truth and Love, would love to give you a resource, and if you'd be open to following me on Facebook, that would be awesome. So, two things. One is Gianna Jessen. I highly challenge you to follow her. Gianna was attempted to be aborted with a saline abortion, and she was born in an abortion clinic. She is a precious woman. She has cerebral palsy. I got to hear her speak at a banquet. I think she went for about an hour and 15 minutes, maybe an hour and a half. And every person in the room wanted her to keep talking. I think that's only occurred in my life one other time. Follow her on Facebook. She is wonderful. But she's the product of an abortion that went wrong. And it's just so beautiful because everything she does is proof that we shouldn't be killing these children. Everything she does. She has plants. When she waters those plants would be dead if it weren't for her. She goes, everything she does is proof that life has value. And to say, well, Gianna, your life is worthless. Gianna has an amazing life. And she's done some incredible things. She's testified recently in front of Congress. An incredible woman that lives with disability. A beautiful story. But you know what we need? We need you guys. That's what we need. We need people that speak the truth in love. And we need them in the next generation. I believe, I hope in my lifetime, but certainly in yours, we can end abortion, at least in this country. I'm going to tell you that day on the 4th, I'm really going to celebrate because all the lives, even the ones that aren't born, will be truly free then. I get really excited about that day. But it's not going to happen from my voice. I'll keep speaking, but it's going to happen from yours. You read the story of Sophie Scholl. She joined the White Rose Society in Germany, and they were publishing pamphlets against the Nazis. They found out that they were doing this, and they abandoned the printing press and took the remaining pamphlets and scattered them around the University of Munich. They went to the highest building in the university and pushed the pamphlets off, and a janitor saw her. When they did, the janitor reported, and the janitor was actually illiterate, didn't even know what the pamphlet said. He probably would have never reported her had he did. And they were exposing the atrocities of the Nazis. Well, they arrested Sophie, her brother, and a friend of theirs. They beheaded them a couple weeks later. They asked her, why? Why would you write these pamphlets? Here's what she said. I am a Christian and I am a German. Therefore, I am responsible for Germany. I am a Christian and I am an American. Therefore, I am responsible for the lives that are being exterminated before they're even born.
Thanks again for checking out this month's Hillside Talk. The Hillside is a young adult community in Las Vegas, Nevada that meets the last Monday of every month. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram to keep up with the upcoming events. We hope to see you at our next gathering.